I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. The day started like any other. I woke up early, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table waiting for my wife, Emma, to join me. She always took her time getting ready in the mornings, even when she was just heading to the office. Her ritualistic approach to makeup and her hair was something I had grown accustomed to over the years. To me, it was just one of those little things you accept in marriage, the quirks, the routines, the habits. But lately, something had shifted. The tension between us had been growing, subtle at first, but undeniable now. As she came down the stairs, she glanced at me with that same distant look I had been noticing for months. I forced a smile and greeted her. She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she quickly grabbed it, muting the screen before I could see anything. I wasn't sure why, but something about that little gesture made my stomach churn. This had become more frequent, her attachment to her phone, the quiet, secretive conversations that always seemed to happen when I wasn't around. Emma was dressed for work, as usual. Professional, put together. You'd never guess there was anything wrong. But I could feel it. Something was off. I tried to shake it off as we ate breakfast in near silence, the sound of the spoon clinking against her bowl of oatmeal becoming the only conversation between us. I wanted to ask her what was going on, but I couldn't find the words. Every time I thought about confronting her, I imagined her brushing it off with a smile, making me feel like I was paranoid. I had always trusted her. I wanted to keep trusting her. But deep down, something didn't add up. I watched her as she stood up to rinse her dish. The way she moved felt calculated, distant. She used to engage with me, chat about our day, or make little jokes. Now, there was a wall between us that seemed impenetrable. As she reached for her purse, ready to leave, she hesitated, turning back toward me. I'm heading out early today. Late meeting tonight, so I might not be back until after 10, she said casually. I nodded, pretending not to care. Okay. Drive safe. She smiled, but again, it didn't reach her eyes. I will. And just like that, she was gone. I sat at the table for a while, listening to the fading sound of her car pulling out of the driveway. There was something so final about the way she said goodbye this morning, like she was trying to tell me without telling me that this was it, that whatever was left of us was disappearing. I stood up and began clearing the table, lost in thought. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just imagining things. I wanted to believe that, but my gut said otherwise. I had ignored it for too long. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a quick trip out to grab a few things for the house. I had just stepped out of the grocery store when I realized I had left my wallet in the car. As I opened the door, there it was, sitting right in the passenger seat where she always left it, her phone. She must have forgotten it in her rush this morning. My first instinct was to leave it alone. It was her phone. But the temptation gnawed at me. I hesitated, staring at the device as if it held all the answers I'd been too afraid to ask for. Curiosity got the best of me. I picked it up. The screen was still lit up from a recent message. My heart raced as I swiped to open the lock screen. The message app was still up, and the name on the top wasn't familiar, someone named Nick. I had never heard of a Nick. My chest tightened as I read the words on the screen. Last night was incredible. I can't wait to see you again this weekend. Same place. I froze. The world around me seemed to stop. The sounds of the parking lot, the people passing by, everything went silent. I read the message again, just to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. But there it was, plain as day. My wife, my Emma, was seeing someone else. And it wasn't just an innocent lunch date or a work thing. The implication was clear. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrolled up through their previous messages, each one more damning than the last. Flirtatious texts, plans to meet, mentions of hotel rooms. It was all there, spelled out in a string of words that shattered the illusion I had been holding on to. I didn't know how long I sat there in the car, staring at the phone, my hands trembling. This was it. The proof I had been too scared to find. For months, I had been pushing down that nagging feeling, telling myself that I was overreacting, that Emma would never do something like this. But now, there was no denying it. She was cheating on me. With someone named Nick. The realization hit me like a tidal wave, flooding my mind with questions. How long had this been going on? Why didn't I see it sooner? And what the hell was I supposed to do now? The first emotion that gripped me was disbelief. Emma had been my rock, the person I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. We had built a life together, filled with memories, plans for the future. And now, all of that felt like a lie. How could she have done this to me? To us? Then came the anger. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to scream. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to call her out on her betrayal. But something held me back. Not yet. This needed to be done right. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of catching her off guard. I wasn't going to let her manipulate her way out of this. No, I was going to take my time. Plan this carefully. I started the car, my mind racing with thoughts of what I would do next. Confrontation wasn't enough. She needed to feel what I was feeling, the same gut-wrenching betrayal that had torn through me just moments ago. I wasn't going to sit back and play the victim. I needed to make sure she paid for what she had done. Not just with me, but with everyone who knew her. When I got home, I began to gather the pieces of my plan. I knew where to start. If this Nick guy thought he could just stroll into my life and take what was mine, he had another thing coming. And Emma? She wasn't going to get away with this. Not this time. When Emma came home that night, I acted as if nothing had changed. But everything had. My heart pounded with the weight of the secret I now carried, yet I forced a smile, pretended to be the same clueless husband she had fooled for months. She had no idea I had seen the messages, no idea that I was planning something that would make her regret ever crossing me. I sat on the couch, casually flipping through the channels when she walked in. "Hey," she said, her tone light, almost carefree. She kicked off her shoes and slung her purse over the chair, like nothing was out of the ordinary. My eyes followed her as she moved around the living room, settling in after what I now knew was an evening spent with him, Nick. The thought of her with him made my blood boil, but I kept my cool. "Hey, how was your day?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She shrugged, smiling faintly. "Oh, you know, the usual. Meetings, lots of paperwork. Nothing exciting." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of her lie. Meetings, paperwork, right. But I didn't let it show. Instead, I leaned back and smiled. "You work too hard. We should plan a weekend away or something." She glanced at me, looking slightly surprised. Maybe she hadn't expected me to be so normal. But she quickly recovered. "Yeah, maybe. We'll see." That was it. That was her answer. Non-committal, vague, just like everything had been for the past few months. But this time, I knew better. I wasn't the fool anymore. Over the next few days, I played the role of the doting husband to perfection. I'd bring her coffee in the morning, ask her about work, even suggest we watch a movie together after dinner. I wanted to see how long she'd keep up the charade. Each time she looked at her phone, every time she slipped into the bathroom with it, I wondered if she was texting him, arranging their next secret rendezvous. It took everything in me not to grab the phone out of her hand and demand answers. But I held back. This needed to be done carefully. I wasn't just going to confront her, I was going to expose her. I started gathering more evidence, just to make sure there was no way she could talk her way out of this. I checked the phone bill, found his number, Nick's number, and noticed just how often they had been talking. Late night calls when I thought she was asleep, texts throughout the day. Every interaction painted a clearer picture of their betrayal. I dug deeper, even going through her emails when she wasn't around. There, too, were more signs. Emails to friends, vague messages about needing space and figuring things out. She hadn't mentioned him by name, but I knew what those emails were really about. One evening, while she was at work, I drove to the hotel where they had been meeting. It wasn't hard to figure out, the texts and emails had given me enough clues. I sat in my car across the street, watching as people came and went, wondering how many times she had walked through those doors with him, pretending she was on some work trip or late meeting. I hated how easily she had lied, how she had made me believe that our life was still intact while she was sneaking around behind my back. But this was only the beginning. I wanted to see them together. I needed to. I had to watch it all unfold with my own eyes, to cement my plan in place. So I waited. A few days later, she told me she had another late meeting. Probably won't be back until after 9, she said, grabbing her purse and heading for the door. All right, I replied, keeping my tone light. Don't work too hard. She smiled, a tight-lipped, almost rehearsed smile. I won't. As soon as she left, I grabbed my car keys. I knew where she was headed, and I wasn't going to miss it this time. I followed her at a distance, careful not to get too close. She drove across town, straight to the hotel. I parked down the street, watching as she stepped out of the car, looking around as if to make sure no one had followed her. Then she walked inside, phone in hand, no doubt texting him to let him know she had arrived. My heart pounded as I waited, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. A part of me wanted to storm in there, grab her by the arm, and drag her out in front of everyone, but I wasn't ready yet. This was just another step in the plan. I waited for nearly an hour, watching as the sun set and the streetlights flickered on. Finally, I saw him. Nick. He walked up to the hotel entrance casually, as if he didn't have a care in the world. He looked like the kind of guy who thought he was invincible, tall, athletic, confident. I hated him instantly. This was the man who had ruined my marriage, the man who had stolen my wife. I stayed in my car, watching him disappear into the hotel. I clenched the steering wheel, my mind racing with the possibilities of what was happening inside. It was infuriating, knowing that they were just a few hundred feet away, oblivious to the fact that I was sitting out here, planning their downfall. But I wasn't ready to act yet. Not tonight. Instead, I drove home, seething in silence. The images of them together replayed in my mind over and over again, fueling my determination to see this through. I had everything I needed now, the proof, the motive, the rage. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to strike. When Emma came home later that night, she slipped into bed beside me without a word. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she could be so heartless. How she could come home and pretend like nothing was wrong, like our life wasn't falling apart. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't just going to end it. I was going to make her feel the same pain she had inflicted on me. And Nick? He wouldn't walk away from this unscathed either. The plan began to take shape. I reached out to a lawyer the next day, started the paperwork for divorce, but I kept it quiet. Emma wouldn't know what hit her. Not until I was ready. I would play the game for a little longer, act like the loving husband while she dug herself deeper into the lie. And when the time came, I would expose her for what she really was. Over the next few weeks, I watched her closely, gathering every bit of information I could. I started recording conversations, saving text messages, even taking photos of her leaving the house late at night. There was no room for doubt anymore. I was building my case, piece by piece, ensuring that when the time came, I would have everything I needed to destroy her. But I wasn't just doing this for me. I wanted everyone to know what kind of person she was. Her friends, her family, they all thought she was perfect, that we had the ideal marriage. But I was going to show them the truth. I was going to expose her for the liar she was, and when I was done, there would be nothing left for her to hide behind. I waited for the perfect moment. And it came, sooner than I expected. The moment arrived on a Friday night. It was a cool, clear evening, the kind that should have been perfect for winding down after a long week. Instead, I was preparing for the climax of a betrayal that had been brewing for months. Emma had left earlier that evening for another meeting, and I knew exactly where she was going, back to him. I had watched them sneak around long enough, and tonight, I was finally going to put my plan into motion. I was done pretending. All the pieces were in place. Over the past few weeks, I had gathered everything I needed, emails, texts, photos, even receipts from their little meetups. It had been painful to see how deep the affair went, but at least now I was armed with enough proof to make sure Emma could never talk her way out of this. But it wasn't just about proof anymore. It was about making her feel the same humiliation she had put me through. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the divorce papers neatly stacked in front of me. Her signature would be the last piece of the puzzle. But I wasn't going to hand them to her in private. No, that would be too easy. Too painless. I wanted to see the shock on her face, the horror in her eyes when she realized her perfect little world was crashing down around her. Tonight, it would all unravel. I had timed everything perfectly. The dinner party was already in full swing when I arrived, walking into the upscale restaurant where some of our closest friends and family had gathered. Emma didn't know I had planned to show up. As far as she knew, this was just another night for her to enjoy with her friends before slipping off to meet Nick. I entered the room casually, keeping my face neutral as I surveyed the crowd. People were laughing, talking, raising glasses of wine in toasts. The mood was festive, warm, but I was about to shatter it. I spotted Emma near the back, sitting at a table with a few of her girlfriends. She was dressed to impress, wearing the same little black dress I had always loved on her. But tonight, it only filled me with disgust. She was laughing, smiling, completely unaware of what was about to happen. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. My heart raced, not from nerves, but from the anticipation of what I was about to do. I walked over to the bar and ordered a drink, my eyes never leaving her. I wanted to savor this moment, to remember the look on her face when everything came crashing down. As I sipped my whiskey, I noticed her phone light up on the table next to her glass of wine. She glanced at it, and I knew, without even seeing the screen, that it was him. Nick. The same smug bastard who had been playing house with my wife behind my back. I felt the anger flare up inside me again, but I kept it in check. Just a little longer. I finished my drink and made my move, weaving through the tables until I stood just a few feet away from her. One of her friends noticed me first, her eyes widening in surprise. "Oh, hey, Mark," she called out, drawing Emma's attention to me. Emma turned around, her smile faltering when she saw me standing there. For a split second, there was confusion in her eyes, followed by a flicker of panic. She hadn't expected me to be here. She opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, I spoke. "Surprised to see me?" I asked, my voice low but loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. Yeah, I thought you weren't coming tonight." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Well, I thought I'd make an appearance. You know, surprise you." Her friends exchanged awkward glances, sensing that something was off, but they didn't say anything. Emma gave a nervous laugh, clearly trying to play it off. "Well, it's great to see you," she said, standing up and stepping closer to me. "Let's go get a drink together." I could feel the tension building in the room as she tried to steer me away from the table. But I wasn't going anywhere. "Actually," I said, my voice louder now, drawing the attention of everyone nearby, "I think we need to talk right here." Emma's smile faded completely. She looked at me, eyes wide with fear, as if she knew what was coming but couldn't stop it. "Mark, what are you talking about?" she whispered, her hand lightly touching my arm. I stepped back, pulling away from her touch. "I know, Emma," I said coldly, my voice ringing out over the murmur of conversations. "I know about you and Nick." The color drained from her face, and the room seemed to freeze around us. Conversations died down, and all eyes were on us now. Emma's friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly unsure of what to do. Emma herself stood there, speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I didn't stop. I had spent weeks planning this, and I wasn't going to let her off the hook easily. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a stack of papers, the divorce documents. "Here," I said, holding them out to her. "I think you'll want to take a look at these." Her hands shook as she took the papers from me, her eyes scanning the words in disbelief. "Mark, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Let's not do this here." But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I turned to face the rest of the room, raising my voice so everyone could hear me clearly. "For those of you who don't know, my wife has been having an affair with a man named Nick for months. I've known about it for a while, but tonight, I wanted all of you to know the truth." Gasps echoed around the room, followed by whispers and shocked expressions. Emma's friends looked mortified, some of them covering their mouths in disbelief. Emma herself was frozen, staring at me with wide, pleading eyes. But I didn't stop. "I've been a good husband," I continued, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions raging inside me. "I've stood by her through everything, trusted her, loved her. And this is how she repays me. By sneaking around behind my back with someone else." I could see the tears welling up in Emma's eyes now, but I didn't care. This was her reckoning. She had lied to me, betrayed me, and now she was going to face the consequences. I turned back to her, my voice low but filled with icy resolve. "Sign the papers, Emma. It's over." She looked down at the divorce documents in her hands, her lips trembling. I could see the realization sinking in, the weight of what she had done finally crashing down on her. She had been caught, exposed in front of everyone she cared about, and there was no way out. Slowly, she nodded, her tears spilling over as she took a pen from her purse. Her hands shook as she signed the papers, her signature marking the end of our marriage. When she was done, she handed them back to me, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice broken. But I wasn't interested in her apology. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the middle of the restaurant, surrounded by whispers and judgmental stares. The weight I had been carrying for so long was finally gone, replaced by a cold, satisfying emptiness. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. I had done it. I had taken back control. Emma's life, her lies, her affair, it was all laid bare for the world to see. And I was free. I thought the hardest part was over. I thought that after exposing Emma and ending our marriage, I would feel relief, maybe even triumph. But as the days passed, that feeling of satisfaction I had anticipated never came. Instead, a dull, aching emptiness settled into the pit of my stomach, growing with each passing day. It wasn't just the house that felt empty without her, though that was part of it. The spaces she once occupied now felt haunted, her side of the bed, the chair at the kitchen table, the bathroom mirror where her reflection used to linger as she got ready for work. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of her, of us, of the life we had built together. And as much as I wanted to hate her, as much as I tried to fuel that anger inside of me, something else was gnawing at me, something I hadn't expected: grief. I was grieving the loss of our marriage, the loss of the woman I had loved for so many years. No matter what she had done, no matter how badly she had betrayed me, I couldn't shake the memories of the good times, the moments when we were happy. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that those moments had been real, for me, at least. But what haunted me the most was the question I couldn't stop asking myself: had they ever been real for her? A few weeks passed, and life moved on in a blur. Friends called to check in, offering their support, but I found it harder and harder to talk about what had happened. The anger, the adrenaline that had driven me to expose her in front of everyone, had faded. All that was left now was the hollow silence of my empty house, and a sense of loss that I couldn't shake. I hadn't heard from Emma since that night at the restaurant. She had signed the papers, left quietly, and seemingly vanished from my life. A part of me was grateful for that. I didn't want to see her, didn't want to face the messy aftermath of everything I had done. But there was another part of me, a small, shameful part, that missed her. It missed the routine of us, the familiar rhythm of our life together, even if it had all been built on lies. It was late one evening, just after the sun had set, when my phone rang. I hadn't expected a call, and for a moment, I didn't even recognize the number. When I answered, the voice on the other end was one I hadn't heard in weeks but knew immediately. It was Emma's sister, Lauren. "Mark," she said, her voice thick with something I couldn't place. I don't know how to say this, but you need to come to the hospital." I felt a chill run down my spine, my grip tightening on the phone. "What happened? Is Emma okay?" There was a pause, and when Lauren spoke again, her voice broke. "No. She's not okay, Mark. She tried to take her own life." The world seemed to spin out of control for a moment, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't process what I was hearing. It didn't make sense. Emma? The woman who had so coldly and calmly betrayed me, who had lied to me for months, who had moved on so easily, how could she have done this? I don't understand," I stammered, my mind racing. "Where is she? Is she?" "She's alive," Lauren said quickly. "But it's bad. The doctors don't know if she's going to make it." My chest tightened, a feeling of dread washing over me. I didn't say anything more. I couldn't. I just hung up the phone, grabbed my keys, and drove to the hospital. When I arrived, the sterile smell of antiseptic and the low hum of hospital equipment filled the air. Lauren was waiting for me in the hallway outside Emma's room, her face pale and tear-streaked. She didn't need to say anything. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know. I stepped inside the room, and there she was. Emma lay motionless in the hospital bed, her face pale against the white sheets. Tubes ran from her arms and a ventilator softly pumped air into her lungs. She looked so small, so fragile, nothing like the woman I had confronted in that restaurant weeks ago. Nothing like the Emma who had always been so full of life. I stood there, staring at her, my mind racing with everything that had happened. The anger, the betrayal, the revenge, it all felt so distant now, so meaningless. I had wanted to hurt her, to make her feel the same pain she had inflicted on me. But now, standing here in this cold, sterile room, I realized that nothing I had done could compare to the pain she must have been feeling. I sat down next to her bed, the sound of the machines beeping softly in the background. I didn't know what to say, didn't even know if she could hear me. But I spoke anyway. "I never wanted this," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you like this." The tears came then, unbidden and unstoppable. I hadn't cried throughout the entire ordeal, not once. But now, sitting here next to the woman I had once loved, the woman who had betrayed me, I couldn't stop them. The pain, the guilt, the overwhelming sadness, it all came rushing in at once, drowning me. "I don't know why you did what you did," I continued, my voice cracking. "I don't know if we could have fixed it. Maybe we couldn't. But I never wanted it to end like this." The door opened softly, and a doctor entered, glancing at me with a sympathetic expression. "She's stable, but it's too soon to tell," he said quietly. "We'll have to wait and see how she responds over the next few days." I nodded numbly, barely processing his words. Emma lay there, silent and still, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the ventilator. I sat there for hours, just watching her, waiting for a sign, any sign that she would wake up, that she would come back from this. But the days passed, and she didn't. The doctors eventually told us there had been too much damage. Emma never regained consciousness. I attended her funeral a week later. It was a small, quiet service, attended only by close family and a few friends. I stood at the back, watching as they lowered her casket into the ground, feeling a weight in my chest that I couldn't shake. There was no closure, no sense of justice, no satisfaction. I had gotten my revenge, but it had come at a cost I hadn't expected. And now, standing at her grave, I realized that in the end, I had lost more than I had ever imagined. Life went on, but I carried the weight of her death with me, a constant reminder of what could have been. In my quest for revenge, I had destroyed not only my marriage, but the woman I had once loved. And no amount of vengeance could ever undo that.